Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale, the headlines. Even more strikes. Southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia targeted with further missiles overnight. And this morning, residents seek shelter again as air raid sirens sound around the country. United Nations members express solidarity with Ukraine following Russian attacks. And Refugees Aid Group pauses Ukraine fieldwork for security reasons. We begin this morning with the news that the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia has been targeted with further missiles overnight. That's according to its regional governor. Alexander Staruk wrote on Telegram just after 6 this morning that Russia had struck infrastructure, adding that information about damage and casualties was still being ascertained. Dozens of people are said to have been killed during the strikes, which also targeted in Monday's widespread Russian bombardment of Ukrainian cities. According to emergency services, 12 missiles hit public facilities with one person killed. Rescuers are said to have extinguished a fire which had spread over 100 square kilometers. However, Russia is yet to comment on the latest strikes. People in Ukraine are seeking shelter again this morning as air raid sirens have sounded around the country. The threat of further bombardment comes just a day after Russia launched some of the worst attacks on the Ukrainian capital and other cities not near the front in recent months. Lord Richards, who was the United Kingdom's Chief of Defense Staff until 2013, says Russia shouldn't be written off just yet. He said, quote, "It's an immensely large country with all sorts of raw materials, let alone manpower. I really do think it would be early to say that Ukraine would win." He adds that the last thing Britain wants is a drawn-out war, warning that the use of nuclear weapons, then nuclear blackmail, could become a real problem in the future, so we mustn't make that happen. Diplomats need to get their act together. And United Nations members have expressed solidarity with Ukraine after voting on Monday to reject Russia's call for the 193-member body to hold a secret ballot later this week on whether to condemn Moscow's move to annex 4 partially occupied regions. The United Kingdom's ambassador to the UN, Barbara Woodward, said Russia's President Putin was overturning the most sacred principle in international law and urged other member states to support the sovereignty of Ukraine with their votes. The General Assembly decided with 107 votes in favor that it would hold a public vote and not a secret ballot on a draft resolution that would condemn Russia's illegal so-called referenda and the attempted annexation. Diplomats said the vote on the resolution would be likely on Wednesday.
Putin is trying to take Ukraine's land, its resources, its identity. In doing so, he is overturning the most sacred principle in the international system, that borders cannot be drawn by force. This Assembly's call on Russia since the start of its illegal invasion has been simple. End this war and withdraw from Ukraine. For the sake of Ukraine, Russia, and the entire UN membership, we reiterate this call today. We call on Russia to end the war and honor the UN Charter.
In principle, the upcoming vote on the draft resolution presented by Ukraine should be indisputable. A strong and resounding yes. The states which do not recognize the independence of the so-called Donbas People's Republic should not recognize their attempted illegal incorporation to Russia. The former was just a pretext to accomplish the latter. Such behavior is a clear proof of the policy of the fait accompli pursued by the Russian occupiers and their proxies, both in the past and at present. Not condemning the attempted annexation means weakening the UN Charter and weakening the whole UN system. One cannot expect UN institutions to function efficiently if one votes not accordingly to the very foundation they were established upon.
Hundreds of people protested outside the Russian embassy in Warsaw, calling for Russia to be designated a terrorist state and for its diplomats to be expelled after missile strikes killed at least 11 people in Ukrainian cities. Opposition to Russia's invasion is intense in Poland, with the country becoming one of Kiev's staunchest supporters and taking in millions of refugees since the conflict started. Protesters, many draped in the Ukrainian flag, brandished placards with the protest slogan, "Russia is a terrorist state." A representative of the organizers, Euromaidan Warsaw, put the number of protesters at just under 2,000. A police spokesman declined to comment on how many people were present. Russia calls its actions in Ukraine a special military operation that it says is not designed to occupy territory but to destroy its southern neighbors' military capabilities and capture what it regards as dangerous nationalists. President Vladimir Zelensky said during his usual nightly address that restoration works were ongoing after Russian missiles rained down on Ukrainian cities. Russia fired cruise missiles on busy Ukrainian cities yesterday and this morning in what the United States called horrific strikes, killing civilians and knocking out power and heat with its most widespread air attacks since the start of the war. Missiles tore into intersections, parks, and tourist sites in the capital, Kiev, and explosions were reported in Lviv, Ternopil, and Zhytomyr in western Ukraine, Dnipro and Kremenchuk in the center, Zaporizhzhia in the south, and Kharkiv in the east. What you're about to see is the moment cars and pedestrians narrowly avoided a large explosion in Dnipro. The footage was captured in a dashcam video during a day of intense Russian strikes on Ukrainian cities. The vehicle's video window-mounted camera showed a large plume of smoke rising from the immediate horizon, causing traffic to stop before a fiery explosion sent debris crashing down onto the cars below. The location marks included on the dashcam video posted online, which coincided with Google Maps' street view of Kalinova Street in Dnipro. Let's talk now to Professor Dakwa Thomas, Professor of International Relations at the Lagos State University, founding member of the Association of Foreign Relations Professionals in Nigeria. Good morning to you, Prof. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, good morning.
Is it wrong? Is it wrong to expect that the Ukrainians were alleged to have been the ones who attacked the Crimea Bridge over the weekend, and so Russia is hitting back hard on Ukrainian cities? Isn't this tit for tat?
Well, first, every statement and every event has to be based on official information. So as it is now, you know, whatever must have happened on the Kerch Bridge cannot be attributed officially to the Ukrainians, because they have not admitted, and I think they have even denied. So if they have denied, there is nothing to say about that. Initially, Russia itself said it was from a truck bomb. And so what do we believe now? It was an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity for Russia to now decide to pretend as if it was done by Ukraine, and as such, they would have opportunity of retaliating, with serious intensity. Now, initially, I can't put anything past Putin. I'm saying that as a matter of history, of his historical antecedents. I can't put anything past him, because at a stage, it was obvious that Ukraine was winning the war. And he had a very, very low reaction. He had a very ineffective reaction. And that was why he went for the partial mobilization of 300,000 Russians, into the army. And I think it may be part of the strategy of Russia to now intensify its bombardment or to now attack strategic infrastructure of Ukraine. And you can see that the targets of the present or the current airstrikes are civilians and civilian buildings and strategic infrastructure of Ukraine. So I can't put it any because that's one thing. But if it was done by Ukraine and they have not admitted, there is nothing I can say, because they must admit before one can discuss. And they have been admitting some of the things which they have done to Russia in the past. So why would they deny this now? I don't want to speculate that it was Ukraine, since they have denied it. But it was Russia's statement, initial statement, that the breach has witnessed serious explosion as a result of truck bomb, and they have even traced the truck owner into Russia. So I don't understand the whole thing is becoming too complex, but I don't want to put anything past Putin as a way of having an opportunity or creating a kind of vantage position for his to intensify his attack on Ukraine, so that it will now look as if it's a kind of retaliation for what Ukraine has done to the Kerch Bridge.
Now, there's supposed to be this vote, which was what we were reporting just before we came to you, that there's supposed to be this vote at the United Nations condemning this very latest strikes and so on. And someone looking at it from the outside in would say, what is the point behind this? We have had resolutions before in the same United Nations which were widely supported, but they haven't changed any of the facts on the ground. So of what use is any new resolution which is not going to be backed up by the force of arms? Because most of those behind the resolution and who are seeking support of other countries have said they are not going to put their own troops in harm's way, and they're only going to give Ukraine defensive weapons. So of what point is the resolution at the United Nations at this point?
Yeah, protocols are protocols. Processes are processes. So if the United Nations, the United Nations has to do its job. So it's part of some of this rejection of resolutions may be part of what will be counted against Russia should any kind of trial begin. So it's going to count against Russia. So for protocol purpose, for purpose of processes and everything, the United Nations is an institution. So it has its own obligations towards taking a particular process or a procedural process to ensure that at least these declarations or these resolutions were made. And as such, Russia has rejected, possibly, let us take hypothetically, 20 resolutions possibly they have been passed on this incident, on this war. And this is going to count. So the numbers of resolutions rejected by Russia will have to be documented. So it's been documented for posterity, it's been documented for institutional necessity.
Yes, but Professor Thomas, you and I both know that Russia is a veto-wielding member of the United Nations. And at the Security Council, a similar resolution or similar resolutions like this have been tabled and have been vetoed by Russia. So, going by the rules of the United Nations, the processes, as you described them, of the United Nations, those resolutions are null and void because they were vetoed by one of the permanent members of the Council, in this case, Russia. So that's why I asked the question, beyond the paperwork or the, I don't know what you want to call it, the bureaucratic processes, in terms of actual impact, this doesn't have any.
No, so when you want to take, when you want to discuss or you want to attribute some of the violations that Russia has done concerning this war, and then you have seen this number of times that it has vetoed actions or resolutions of the United Nations. So what do you rely on? You have to rely on processes. You have to rely on on history. You have to rely on what has happened. So if they have to veto all these resolutions, then it's part of the things that you are going to count. And then you are going to see the abuse of the veto, of the use of veto. So if you want to discuss, if US, for instance, wants to table a motion or maybe sponsor a resolution that Russia should be stripped of veto power, these are some of the things that will count. That for as long as Russia, I'm sorry, I'm with all sense of modesty, my first reaction to the war was to call for the removal of Russia in the Security Council, because for as long as Russia remains in the Security Council, there is virtually nothing that can be achieved institutionally. There is nothing that can be achieved institutionally. So if they are talking about veto, they are talking about removal from the United Nations Security Council, it's all part of the violations. So if a member of the United Nations Security Council has decided to violate the tenets, the principles, the rules, and the norms of United Nations, so these are some of the things that will have to count against Russia in subsequent discussions on what to do to Russia, because this thing cannot go on like this. It cannot. It is either it de-escalates or it escalates, and you can see that the whole thing is escalating instead of de-escalating. And as such, I want to believe that, and there is no way, because it's a proxy war, kind of, or maybe it's a war that all the other nations, the European nations and the US, are fighting on behalf of Ukraine, but they are not physically involved. They are not operationally involved, but they are involved as a matter of the fact that they are giving arms, and ammunition to Ukraine. And I think there is no way that the 44 European nations or European countries and then the United States will want to lose this war. It's now a war of pride. It's not a war of prestige. So there is no way they want to lose this war. They want to win this war. And so they are ready to go any length. You could see that right from February, March, Ukraine has been calling for advanced air defense system. And the United States insisted that no, they are not going to supply. But now that has been agreed upon. So it's going to escalate. And when it escalates, a lot of things will have to be reviewed, because this thing cannot continue like this. You cannot be a member of the United Nations Security Council and then be invading countries. You are supposed to lead by example, not by precept. So all these things will have to be discussed. And that is the essence of all these institutional processes that I discussed, that I said, I was talking about.
Prof, you're a scholar of repute, and I know that you know that there's those who say that there's a sense of deja vu about all this point to what happened to what was then known as the League of Nations, which more or less suffered the same fate as what we are discussing now about the United Nations, which is where the whole idea about two-tier membership and the first-tier members not being able to abide by the rules where their interests are concerned ensured that that body did not survive. The United Nations has so far survived, but because in this particular instance, this is war, and it's the first actual physical war in Europe following the end of World War II, that this may also be a sense of deja vu that we are going to see I don't know if the word to use is unmasking of the United Nations or the derobing of the United Nations as an effective body. Given what you said about antecedents and what we know about what has happened in the past, are those people wrong to assume that this may be where we're headed?
No, there is no assumption in that. There is no assumption. It's a reality. Like I said, things cannot continue like this. And then, like you have also explained, the League of Nations failed as a result of abuses, as a result of violations. So now we are witnessing on a very large scale serious abuse, serious violation of the institution, of rules and resolutions by the same institution which is expected to generate peace and global security in the world. So the paradox or the contradictions in some of these activities or some of these actions, Russian actions, would have to be addressed. The contradictions cannot continue to exist ad infinitum. There are contradictions, and there are fundamental contradictions and fundamental paradoxes in some of the rules, or some of the principles setting up some of these institutions. And until those things are addressed, and one way or the other, they have to be addressed, because things cannot continue like this. And I do not foresee a situation where things will remain normal. There can be no business as usual post-Ukraine attack. No, there can be no business as usual. Things will have to be reformed. There must be some reform at the United Nations level. And how it's going to be generated, how it's going to happen, how it's going to occur, one cannot really tell, But because this in the international system, there must be cycle. And then the cycle I'm talking about was the first cycle. The second cycle we are about to witness is third cycle. So how it is going to happen will be dependent on the actions taken by US. Unfortunately, Russia and China will also veto. But first thing that has to be done was to look or review the veto action. But yes, you can say they will veto whatever, they will veto everything, but it will happen that the United States will have to take control as a unipolar power. You understand? So it depends on where China goes. If China goes with Russia, then it's going to there will be some delay, or there will be some unpredictable outcome. But if unexpectedly or dramatically China decides to abstain from vetoing anything or any action against Russia, then that's the end. That's the end. The only thing that Putin is relying on now is China's support, because should Britain, France, and US call for withdrawal of veto from Russia, if China abstains or China supports, then that's the end of Russia. There's nothing he can do. There's nothing an individual can do in this kind of situation. So that's the end. So the only thing he's relying on and depending on now is China's support. So that's the thing. But what I'm saying is that the paradoxes and contradictions in the system, in the international system, must be addressed for us to enjoy global peace and security. Indeed. Until that happens, it's going to be like this continuously.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Professor of International Relations, Dr. Thomas, for your time and perspective this morning. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, CEO of top U.S. bank, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, warns of U.S. economic recession in 6 to 9 months. Details in a moment. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The Norwegian Refugee Council, an NGO helping people affected by displacement, has paused its field work in Ukraine for security reasons after Russia fired missiles into cities across the country. Thousands of residents raced to bomb shelters as air raid sirens rang out throughout the day. The barrage of dozens of cruise missiles fired from air, land, and sea was the biggest wave of airstrikes to hit locations away from the front line, at least since the initial volleys on the war's first day, February the 24th.
Attacks were so fierce this morning. It was in the rush hour when our staff was on their way to the work, when the children was on their way to school, and it was in one city after the other, in Kiev, in Dnipro, in Lviv, in Ternopil, in Kharkiv. All of the places where we have operations, this took place. So, of course, we had to pause our operations. We cannot work under a hail of bombs. This is a temporary pause because we're also in a race against the clock to be able to pre-position as much as possible in these areas of conflict before the harsh winter. So I really hope this is over now and we can start to work again. There are many people injured. There are many people dead. How many? Time will show. But what is perhaps less well known is that it has really paralyzed electricity and even water supply to very many communities. And again, these are communities that are already hurting from this extended conflict. And these are communities that soon will be freezing, as it could be sub-zero conditions, freezing temperatures, in only a few weeks.
And European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen condemned the Russian firing of cruise missiles at cities across Ukraine, killing civilians and knocking out power and heat. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas called on NATO countries and allies to provide Kiev with air defense so that the Ukrainians can protect their cities.
I am shocked and appalled by the vicious attack on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. Russia once again has shown to the world what it stands for. It is terror and brutality. Those who are responsible have to be held accountable. We are mourning the victims, and I send my heartfelt condolences to our Ukrainian friends. I know Ukrainians will not be intimidated, and Ukrainians know that we will stand by their side as long as it takes.
We send a clear message to all the Ukrainians. We are supporting you every possible way, and what we have to do is definitely deliver air defense from the Allied side so that the Ukrainians can protect their cities, their civilians, because Russia is definitely escalating to harm the civilians. We are with the victims. We stand by Ukraine.
And U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after a deluge of Russian missiles targeted cities across Ukraine, condemning the strikes and pledging continued U.S. security assistance, including advanced air defense systems. During the call, the White House statement said Mr. Biden expressed his condemnation of Russia's missile strikes across Ukraine, including in Kiev, and conveyed his condolences to the loved ones of those killed and injured in those attacks. The president pledged to continue providing Ukraine with the support needed to defend itself, including advanced air defense systems. The White House did not specify which air defense systems Mr. Biden discussed with Mr. Zelensky, but the United States had previously committed to providing Ukraine with National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, NASAMS, which would be capable of engaging Russian cruise missiles. J.P. Morgan chief executive has warned that the United States is likely to tip into an economic recession in 6 to 9 months. Jamie Dimon, CEO of the U.S. top bank, said the recession may not be as serious as the global financial crisis of 2008, but warned that runaway inflation, big interest rate hikes, Russia-Ukraine conflict, and some other factors will bring uncertainties to the future. Mr. Dimon said he couldn't say how long the recession might last and alerted market participants to evaluate the consequences. Let's talk to Laddie Williams. Loud warning from the world's #1 banker. Morning, Laddie.
Yeah.
Many people call Jamie Dimon the world's #1 banker because he is the head
yes.
of the world's biggest bank in terms of influence. The biggest banks, of course, are in China.
Right.
But there are other things that seem to give added pep to his warning. In Germany, the government is to pay the December bills for households and businesses. Right. How did that come about? Because what we were hearing before was they were going to be rationing,
right,
and all that. So how did this?
Trying to, cut consumption, even though cutting consumption is also one of the major steps they'll be taking. But at the end of the day, the energy and the gas issues in Europe and Germany is still biting, and they're still trying to make plans on how to buffer, create some kind of buffer for the economy, the citizens, and businesses, because at the end of the day, we've seen how Russia weaponized gas to Germany. And Germany, the biggest economy in Europe, cannot afford, to not have their, manufacturing going, have their homes, heated or cooled, during the winter. But with what's happening now, even though the citizens need protection, right, businesses also need a lot of protection because this is an export-based economy. Right. So if their manufacturing is affected, it's going to impact.
Basically, it's going to tank the economy.
It's going to tank the economy, and at the end of the day, they have to find ways to make sure that they can actually, help the citizens and businesses. So that's why they're, looking at handling some of these bills. Even though it's going to, you have to think of where the money is going to come from.
But that was going to be my next question to you.
Because at the end of the day,
while we're looking after, we're looking after the citizens, but then where's the money going to come from?
Exactly. So they're trying to see how they can, create some kind of, subsidy for the citizens and businesses, see how, just to make it a winter that wouldn't cripple the economy, make sure they're still able to produce, make sure the, manufacturers can still, pay their workers, because if that is affected, then
of course, it's going to spiral
the ripple
down
effect,
the economy. Yeah.
Exactly, and obviously we know there are already drums of recession, being sounded.
Yeah,
so.
Because incidentally, the incidence of bankruptcy claims by companies and partnerships in Germany have gone up 34% year on year.
Exactly, yeah.
The incidents are now, as at now, 762, much higher.
And it's actually beats, the forecast. And at the end of the day, we've seen how, the central bank there have, raised rates at this time, and they've also had to increase labor wage, per hour. So all of that is adding to the cost, of businesses, and some of them cannot handle it. They're not making that much revenue. The important factors of production are getting more expensive, for these businesses. So at the end of the day, some of them have to, throw in the towel, and that's why we're seeing this, happen at this time. So the government have a lot on their hands, right now, and they need to find a way to solve these gas issues and, other cost of production prices so that the economy can still stand. But the fears are still there. They're still talking, looking for ways, to create some kind of buffer around what's happening there.
Now, we've talked about this repeatedly. The Russians seem to have, right, and be very careful, have escaped most of what is happening elsewhere, all the runaway inflation and so on we've been talking about. While everybody was hiking interest rates, they were dropping it and so on. But it does appear as if the chickens are headed home now.
Exactly. And even though we know they didn't want the ruble, to be so strong because that actually impacts their exports. Right. We saw them actually try to, weaken the ruble. And that's happening now, but we don't know how weak, they actually want it to be, at this time. But at the end of the day, we know how, the Russian economy, they've been shielding, a lot of data that, would help us gauge,
whether
how,
it's really...
Yes, they've shielded a lot of data coming, from there. They give us the one, that they want us to see. So, at the end of the day, we're seeing the ruble actually weaken now.
3-month low.
3-month low, but we're seeing some other currencies actually rise, even though the DXY took a little breather, but the DXY is moving again. So with this geopolitical tension, escalating now, we're seeing everyone try to run to safety. So that's why we're seeing the ruble actually, get hammered, at this time. But, it remains to be seen.
It's difficult to see whether they're being hammered or it's a deliberate hammer by those who own the
so it could be a combination of a deliberate hammer and what's happening.
Yeah. Incidentally, how are markets reacting to all the geopolitical tension you mentioned, the warning from Jamie Dimon about runaway inflation and the possibility that the United States could tip into a recession, and that will have worldwide impact? How are the markets reacting?
The markets didn't take it well. We saw yesterday the U.S. markets actually closed in the red again. Yesterday after starting the after ending last week, down. So we're seeing the same thing happen in Europe, because at the end of the day, we know, these economies are intertwined as a global village. Right. What impacts this market impacts the other. And obviously, we're seeing how the U.S. jobs report that, hammered the markets, last week. And that's still, we're still expecting CPI data.
Right.
And that might not be good, from all indications, and PPI, all of that coming out. So we're seeing volatility right now in the market. Investors are looking for a safe haven, and where's the next safe haven? It's cash, the greenback. And we're seeing the DXY, moving up again in contrast to the top other 5 currencies. So markets are not reacting very well. We're seeing Bitcoin already down this morning, touched about $19,100. We've seen Ethereum also hit there. So it's not an easy time to be an investor. I keep saying it, but if you're able to...
Yeah, if you have the nerve
to go through this, some analysts believe the bottom is close. Some say the bottom is still far. So those investors that are still invested now have a lot on their plate to worry about. But at the end of the day, long-term investors are still, buying the dip and moving on.
Yeah, just
but it's not easy. It's not easy.
It isn't. It isn't. Rough times.
Yeah.
And so many people are beginning to warn rougher times maybe also on the horizon. Thank you, Laddie. There'll be more of that, of course, on Business Incorporated and Bizink later on in the day. But for now, thank you. We'll take another break, and when we return, detained Russian opposition figure Vladimir Kara-Murza wins Human Rights Prize for his bravery in standing up to Russia's leaders. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The United Kingdom's jobless rate fell to 3.5% in 3 months to August, according to the Office of National Statistics, the lowest since early 1974. However, the squeeze on pay remains, with rises in regular wages failing to keep up with the rising cost of living. The ONS says when taking the rise in prices into account, the value of regular pay actually fell by 2.9%. According to the ONS, regular pay, which excludes bonuses, grew at an annual rate of 5.4% in the June to August period. And that's the strongest growth in regular pay seen outside of the coronavirus pandemic period, according to the U.S. statistics body. Now, Kwasi Kwarteng's decision to bring forward the date of his plan to balance the government's finances has failed to reassure markets. Government borrowing costs rose sharply after the UK Treasury Chancellor said he would fast-track his plan to 31st of October. The plan will set out how he will fund tax cuts and reduce debt after his mini-budget sparked market turmoil. An independent forecast of the UK's economy prospects are expected to be published at the same time. In the wake of the September mini-budget, the pound slumped to a record low. Government borrowing costs surged, and the Bank of England was forced to step in and take emergency action after the dramatic market movements hit some pension funds and put them at risk of collapse. Let's talk about some of this and other stories on the economic front coming out of the United Kingdom. Juliana Olayinka, our London correspondent, joins us from our studios there for more. Good morning to you, Juliana.
Good morning, Laddie.
Now, let's just take a slightly broader overview of all of this. What's been the general reaction outside, beyond all the figures and all the statistics, to what is happening? What can you tell us about how British residents are reacting to, the issue of energy prices and the government's plan to tackle that and the general economic crisis?
Well, it's a good question, and there's just so much going on, and today is going to be a day where we get lots of answers from that, because it's a busy day in Westminster. Today is the first day that Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, will convene her cabinet, because we've had 2 weeks of a slowdown because of the party conferences. We first of all had the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, where there was kind of a resounding sentiment towards Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour opposition party, a sentiment that people said they hadn't felt since the mid-90s and the kind of success of Tony Blair. So we went from a big high to a big low, a dip in Birmingham, because people were just so offended by the mini budget and the fact that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss decided to go against the Office for Budget Responsibility, and they crashed the pound. So she is meeting this morning with her cabinet, her top team, and of course there is lots of tension. A lot of the tension is not just within the borders, it's outside of the borders, and now what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. I think one thing that is going to be very, very difficult for Liz Truss is how she manages to balance the domestic issues with the international issues, because of course we know that Boris Johnson was such a strong ally towards Volodymyr Zelensky, and at this moment politically Liz Truss just cannot afford to offer that sort of support because she has so many knives in her back from the backbenchers that want to get her out as quickly as possible. So she is convening this cabinet meeting at the moment, and then of course the G7 are going to be having that virtual gathering in about an hour or so, where Volodymyr Zelensky will be there asking for more political and economic support. To date, I believe that Britain has already offered about £2.3 billion, and this is just offering military support. They'll have to do so much more than that. And again, that does bring it back to the point of just how much Liz Truss can offer. And then at 2:30 we will be seeing her in the House of Commons, where she'll be going against Sir Keir Starmer. So that is going to be a very interesting gathering. At the moment, I think a lot of people in Britain are sick to their back teeth of what's going on politically. We only have to look at polls that have been conducted by YouGov, and unfortunately for Liz Truss, she is less popular than Jeremy Corbyn was. And if you remember, Laddie, Jeremy Corbyn was particularly unpopular just before he was ousted by the party. So things are not looking great. And then, of course, we had that decision by OPEC to cut oil production. So even the political petrol situation is not going to be great for her, but I think the delicate balance is how she's going to handle the issue with Ukraine and the domestic cost of living crisis.
Now, you did allude to it there when you talked about the YouGov poll and the fact that, I mean, everybody, the backbenchers, the Labour Party and the Conservatives are all interested in elections that must, if I'm not mistaken, be held thereabouts 2024. Are you still able to hear me, Juliana?
I can hear you through other means, not through the door, but through not through my ear, but through another door. So keep going, Laddie.
All right. I was going to say that elections are possibly due at the very latest in 2024. So all of this is going to feed into that. And as you said, Liz Truss is perhaps, we shall say, unfairly unpopular at this point, but she's struggling. And on the street, this issue of gas prices, the winter is upon us. The people who are going to eventually vote, are they going to give her a slight break, do you think?
I don't think so. I think one of the issues, Laddie, that the Conservative Party have, and it's just unfair for Liz Truss that she happens to be holding the poison chalice at the moment, is that they've been in power for far too long. I think that's what most observers are saying. I think, you know, it's been 12 years. Every time you hear them speak on an elevated platform, they're always talking about the issues that happened a year ago or 2 years ago. You've been in power for 12 years. I think people now are desperate for a change. I think it's the same old Tory politics, but just with somebody different at the top. And things are really tough at the moment. Things are tough for a lot of people. We're going into a very, very difficult winter. The issues between Russia and Ukraine are, of course, creeping into these borders. Let's not forget Brexit. Brexit is still happening. We don't talk about Brexit because there are so many other issues on top of the news agenda that keep pushing it back down. But there are so many small businesses that are getting caught up in all of the bureaucracy. Scotland is still desperate. Well, we think the vast majority of Scottish individuals are asking for a referendum. They're not happy with the situation in the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland feel completely blindsided by the withdrawal agreement. They also want to take their own path forward. And so now we have Liz Truss, who has come into this situation where the only ally she seemingly has is Kwasi Kwarteng, who has upset the market so drastically. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens today, because as I said, today is the first day that Westminster are back with a bang, so we get to feel the sentiment after 2 weeks of party conferences, and to see whether or not she can instill some sort of confidence in her backbenchers, because of course they still will want to keep their party seats, and the only way they're going to be able to keep them is if they rally behind the Prime Minister. But yes, it'll be interesting to see after her showdown in the House of Commons at 2:30 how the polls respond to that, and whether or not the British public are willing to give her a second chance. But I doubt it. And you do say 2024 is when we're likely to see an election. It could be much closer than that. It could be before the end of the year. It could even be January if she's not ousted by her party.
Indeed. There are people who shudder when you say that, Juliana, and say that they expected the night of long knives to be further down the line. But we'll keep an eye on that, and I'm sure that you will as well. Thank you, Juliana. Let's keep some for Business Incorporated and Business Morning coming up after this, where I'm sure you'll be giving more details of that. Juliana Olayinka, thank you. Have a pleasant day ahead in the British capital.
The winner of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize 2022 is Vladimir Kara-Murza.
The Council of Europe has awarded detained Russian opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize for what it called his bravery in standing up to Russia's leaders. Mr. Kara-Murza, who holds both British and Russian citizenship and was a pallbearer at the 2018 funeral of U.S. Senator John McCain, worked as a close aid to opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, who was shot dead in central Moscow in 2015. Twice in 2015 and 2017, Mr. Kara-Murza became suddenly ill and fell into a coma in what he said were poisonings by the Russian security forces.
Russia, Vladimir Putin, speaking the truth is considered a crime against the state. Yet, despite the arrests and the threats and the tidal wave of oppression, thousands of Russians have voiced their opposition to the war on Ukraine. According to human rights groups, some 19,000 people were detained by police at anti-war protests since February. Nearly 4,000 faced administrative charges for speaking out against the war. Dozens, including me, are now imprisoned for it. Journalists, lawyers, teachers, priests, artists, politicians, military officers, people of different backgrounds and different vocations who could not stay silent in the face of this atrocity, even at the cost of personal freedom. I want to dedicate this prize to all of them. I am sorry that I'm not able to join you in person today.
A quick look at the sports. Shakhtar Donetsk coach Igor Jovicevic has insisted that the team will not allow the situation in Ukraine to destroy the team's morale and will battle on the pitch like Ukrainian soldiers. Shakhtar Donetsk face title holders Real Madrid in the reverse fixture of the UEFA Champions League clash in Warsaw tonight. Russia rained cruise missiles on busy Ukrainian cities overnight, knocking out power and heat in its most widespread air attacks since the start of the war. Explosions were reported in Lviv, which is temporary base for the team from Donetsk. Shakhtar Donetsk are hosting their matches in Warsaw owing to the situation in Ukraine. That's where we wrap it up this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladia Keridulali. As always, there'll be updates throughout the day, but especially on the World Today at 5 o'clock, so do watch out for that. But for now, do have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.